14, 2022 is now called to order. Andrea, would you please call the roll?
Good afternoon, everyone. It is now 1:10 p.m. As a reminder to all in attendance, this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the county's YouTube page. Calling the roll, Ms. Conwell. Ms. Conwell is absent at the moment. Ms. Turner.
Here.
Ms. Stevens. Ms. Stevens is absent at the moment. Ms. Simon. Ms. Baker is absent at the moment. Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Sweeney.
Present.
Mr. Tuma. Mr. Tuma is absent at the moment. Mr. Gallagher. Mr. Schron. Mr. Schron is absent at the moment. Council President Jones.
Here.
You have a quorum.
All right, thank you. Andrea, has anyone signed in for public comment?
No public comment has been received.
All right. Well, at this time, we're going to turn the meeting over to be chaired by our Chair of the Finance Department, Councilman Dale Miller.
I would like the record to reflect that Councilmember Tuma is in attendance.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And thank you. This is the second hearing of the second year budget update for 2023. At the last meeting, we had the overview from Director Parfiowicz, and today we're going to hear from four departments that particularly had significant budgetary changes being proposed for 2023. In addition to the public comment at the last meeting, we put forward a process for expert witness testimony. If anybody desired to give more extended testimony about the budget, then can be done with simple public comment, and requested that any such requests be provided to the clerk by 10 o'clock this morning. No requests were received. So we will proceed to the first department, which is the Office of the Medical Examiner, and Dr. Gilson is tied up with a number of urgent matters that he's working on, and Mr. Shannon will present to us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hugh Shannon from the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office. Dr. Gelson does apologize for his absence. He was on call this weekend, and it was a rather violent weekend, so there was a lot to do in the office today. So he's in autopsy.
Is your microphone on?
Light says it's on.
Okay. Just speak a little louder, please. Thank you.
So much like the presentation back in September when we had asked for additional appropriation for 2022, which again, we thank you very much for, 2023 shapes up very much the same way. We have added expenses due to personnel and our body transportation contract. Those are the main sources for the need for additional funds. If you'll recall, because we had lost the 3 pathologists over the summer. We had worked with the administration to raise the pay of the existing pathologists in the office so that we didn't lose any more. That will carry over to the full year salaries for next year. And then the CBA that governs now our forensic scientists in the laboratories, which started in May of this year, again, carries over into the full year with the rate change that was negotiated in the CBA. So that need to be reflected in the 2023 budget as well. And then our body transportation contract, we went out for RFP. There were significant increases in those costs. Staffing issues, inflation, fuel, et cetera, had raised those prices for that vendor as well. Other than that, we don't expect any significant changes going forward, save one. I brought this up. It won't affect the general fund, but the body carts that we use to transport decedents from the morgue to the autopsy suite and are aging out. They'll need to be replaced. There is a statutory fund, the coroner's lab fund, that exists that is designed to pick up these kinds of expenses. I informed budget office today that we would like to start that process next year. That will be a full bid process. I believe there's about $1.3 million in that fund at the moment. That comes from all the work that we do for other counties, the autopsy work that we do for them. That's retained in this special statutory fund to be able to replace equipment in the autopsy suite and the laboratories. That's estimated about $600,000 at current cost to replace the carts. Whether we do it all at once or phase it in, we'll try to make that determination as we go forward.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I'm going to start by asking whether the medical examiner's office can give us an update on how many opiate fatalities we're expecting for 2022.
At current, we're projecting somewhere slightly under last year. Last year ended up being about 675 deaths, overdoses. I think we're hovering somewhere between 625 and 650 with the projections. Still not a great number to have, far too many. We also, I think, just passed the 200 mark on homicides for the year countywide. It's the third year in a row we've been above 200. That hasn't happened in 40 plus years. So it's keeping the office quite busy.
So regarding the opiate fatalities, I would just say again that this reinforces that we have to continue all the efforts we're doing, plus we have to come up with some new solutions that hopefully can move the needle more strongly in the right direction. I'll open the floor to questions by my colleagues, and it looks like the council president is first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just like to maybe elaborate a little more. Dr. Gilson came in maybe a few months ago, and he mentioned the homicides as well, and sort of raised a clarion call around homicides. Tell us a little more. I heard you say the number of 200. Is that how many have happened so far this year?
That's, yeah, our current count over the, there were 5 homicides, I believe, over the weekend countywide. So that, yeah, I think we're at 201.
Tell me a little bit about the increase, or over the last few years, 10 years or so. What are we looking at? Give us a little more context.
We had over 250 in the last 2 years, in each of the last 2 years. We just crossed the 200 mark. We'll probably be close to 225, 235, somewhere in that range. Other than that, I mean, other than the amount of increase that we've seen for these last 3 years, I think Dr. Gilson was mentioning that the percentage that were due to gun violence has gone up. The number of times that decedents have been shot had gone up significantly. I think that reflects a lot of trends within gun violence in general, larger magazines and things like that, that are just allowing a lot more bullets to be fired in those exchanges. And so it's showing up in our work, yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions? Councilman Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You and I seeing you. Just a couple, on my council president's points, and my council chairman's point is the rate of opioid deaths are almost last year's, but these are record years.
Correct.
It went like, is it, if the graph is 400, 500, 600, or is it 200, 300, 600, 600, 600, 600?
So it depends on how far back you want to go.
10 years.
About a decade ago, we were in the 250 to 300
Got it.
range when Dr. Gilson first arrived. It's gone up significantly. 2016, we saw a jump from like 375 to 675. Our record year was 2017. It was 727 or so. It dipped for a couple of years into the 500s, which is still historically bad numbers. And then last year, 675. Now we're going to be 635, 650.
Perfect, I got it. It's hovered around 3, now we're saying about 6.
Right. So it's doubled over the last decade at least. Yeah.
And through the chair, I should have started off, our medical examiner and his team, including you, are rock stars.
Thank you, sir.
My perspective and across everybody I talk to. So keep up the good work. My council presidents, though, with the extra shootings, what it really means, does he have enough capacity to keep up with the amount of situations that arrive? Is he overdosing, and do we need to adjust it even more because we haven't got the trends going in the right direction?
So we monitor these numbers on a regular basis, sometimes on a daily basis. We've worked directly with the chief of staff and the executive to make sure that they're informed when we see troubling trends that start to form. And they've been fairly supportive, as you have with the funding, to expand, say, the firearms lab and add examiners when we needed them. So we're confident that at this point, what we're seeing, that we'll be able to handle the workload that we're experiencing at the moment. Unfortunately, there's no crystal ball in this business either, and 2023 could be completely different. Whether it goes up or down, like we're all hoping that they would go down and we don't need to spend any more money on things like that, but it's hard to say.
And just 2 more briefly, and I can't not mention the state of Ohio's involvement with trying to continue having your efforts, because you went out for the awards that were given, and that's just further recognition of the job that you guys do. On the question of the body transportation, you mentioned through my chair, you had a contract, right?
Correct.
And then once we signed a contract, we have a deal.
Correct.
But then you said things changed, so did the deal change?
No. So we went out to bid at the beginning of this year for a new contract. The vendor that we had was the vendor that it was retained in the bid.
I remember that.
But the contract bid went significantly up because of costs that he was experiencing and trying to get staffing, and obviously all the inflationary issues that everyone's experiencing. So the bid came in significantly higher than what we had budgeted for back in 2021.
Absolutely. Just want to clarify that contract.
Yes, sir.
People are either good or bad. They deal with it. And if it's incredible, we're open-minded to talk to them about it.
Correct.
Mr. Sweeney, if you could speak a little louder in the microphone, that would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you for
Thank you.
letting me know that. And lastly, with the opioids, what my council what my council chairman was talking about was innovative stuff, and I would say that our medical examiner would be a subject matter expert on it, and coming up with new and innovative ways. I want his voice to be heard on the innovation dollars that are being invested, and as we put $5 million in, and if it's going good, we're going to talk about putting more in, and I'd love to have his opportunity, have him have the opportunity to weigh in on his thoughts on that particular.
I'm sure Dr. Gilson would be happy to advise on any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions? Yes.
Mr. Shin, is it?
Yes, ma'am.
So I had a personal tour a few months ago, Dr. Gilson, and I learned way more about some of the stuff that you do there than I thought I would learn that day. It was a great tour. I want to thank Dr. Gilson for explaining to me your collaborative efforts around prevention and treating the opioid crisis. And we talked about the support regionally that you give to your partners, as well as the support that you give to public safety and law enforcement. And so my question was more around the adjustments to the budget. I see that it's about a $3.2 million dollar increase. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So, like I said, most of that is coming from the salary increases that came with our pathologists. The collective bargaining agreement in the forensic labs covers about 42 scientists. So that was the bulk of what the salary adjustments were. The contract, the body transportation contract that Councilman Sweeney was referring to, that was a significant increase, not only from a standpoint of the inflationary issues that we were talking about, but caseload-wise. So as the caseloads go up, more transports take place, it becomes more expensive. We estimate those based on previous years, but again, it's hard to predict with certainty how many transports will be needed in any given year. That made up the bulk of what we had requested. I think there were some smaller amounts to replace some computer equipment in the laboratories, but those were the significant contributors.
Okay, salary, lab, inflation, caseload increase, cost of living. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Sure.
So a couple of follow-up questions.
Yes, sir.
The current body transportation contract is for how long and when does it end?
It's a 5-year contract. It will go through I think mid-year of 2027.
And is there a set price or are there escalators?
I believe it's on a annual basis per transport cost, and that per transport cost goes up each year, each of the 5 years.
And how much is the amount of the increases from year to year?
I would have to go back and check the exact amounts. I don't believe that it's more than 7 or 10% a year, but I'd have to go back and check the numbers to be sure.
So let us know.
Will do.
Even 7% each year for 5 years, that would kick it up almost 50% compounded over a 5-year contract. So that could be pretty substantial.
Good.
And the other question is how close are you to being fully staffed, or are there significant vacancies at this time?
So right now, our main vacancies remain with the 3 pathologists. We've identified 1 candidate we believe will be coming on board in January. And then, like I said, there's a significant national shortage of certified forensic pathologists. Actually, it's global, but in the United States, there are less than 500 at the moment. And so what usually happens is that people go through what they call their fellowship year. That's when people who are certified physicians, pathologists, go for their forensic pathology certification. So they'll do a fellowship in a medical examiner or coroner's office. Those fellowships usually run from July to June. So you'll have a fresh crop of trainees coming out and getting their board certifications at that time. That's when we kind of expect to be able to, in that time period, sometime early next year through that mid-year point, to be able to identify additional candidates who might be coming out of training to be able to fill the rest of the slots.
And my final question, looking forward to the next biennial budget, 2024 to 25, do you see your costs as being fairly stable over that time, or are there significant cost increases that you see coming down the road?
I think if we're just talking about the current programming and operations that we're running, I don't foresee a lot of changes. There are, I think, a couple of initiatives that Dr. Gilson has spoken about at past budgets that we have not been able to implement. COVID didn't help in implementing new programming. So that may be something that would come up in the 24-25 biennial.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman?
Yes.
So I just want to, again, highlight the fact that on the homicides, you mentioned 40-plus years since we've seen these similar numbers. And when you go back that far, we were close to a population of 1 million within the city of Cleveland alone. So to have similar number of deaths when we have a much smaller population, it really just speaks to how acute the problem is, and it's something that we don't talk about very often. But Dr. Gilson did have those conversations with the current executive, and does he have plans to again bring this and his thoughts around this subject to the next administration?
I think we're awaiting the transition committee to reach out, and we were happy to have those discussions with the new administration as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And next we'll call upon Sheriff Stephen Hammett for the Sheriff's Department.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm going to start with, 2022's budget. Originally, $135 million were appropriated in our 2022 budget. In August, $11 million were added to cover the Metro contract, which at that time brought the total to $146,697,285, $146 million plus. Our actual expenditures for 2022 is expected to be around $163 million. We're projected at 135. We wound up actually spending 163. For 2023, our projected budget is 149, 943, 971. Of that, a little less than 104 million is allocated for personnel, and another 46 million for other. Our projected cost for 2023 is 175 million. This includes an additional 16 million in personnel, I believe due to contractual obligations, raises, and other personnel costs. In addition, another 9 million for other items, additional vehicles. We had some items come in at the last minute that we weren't aware of, such as a SWAT vehicle, Bearcat. Unbeknownst to me, it's in close to disrepair. It's about a between $300,000 and $500,000 purchase, and other expenditures that our fiscal team is prepared to expound upon. Also in 2023, we had to transfer a little over $1 million for staff, $466,000 for we have our own HR staff now, and these are for new hires for our HR staff, which means the sheriff's HR staff. We are anticipating an increase in the Metro contract for jail medical, $209,000 for ammunition. As you know, we're required to qualify all of our officers annually and train. About $800,000 in radios and 7 new vehicles. Our fleet currently right now, I believe we have 32 vehicles that are between 150 and 200,000 miles. I believe it is.
Chris Caution. I'm just going to help him out with the vehicles here. Currently, just in law enforcement, we have 97 vehicles. Average mile on these vehicles are 85,000. We have 2 transport vans. One has 212,000 miles on it. We did get BOC approval just recently to buy 2 more transport vans to replace these ones. We have 32 vehicles right now between 100 and 200,000 miles. And what we're trying to do is replace our fleet slowly. We had a meeting with Chief of Staff and OBM middle of last year requesting 7 new vehicles this year. But we were not allowed to put it in this year's budget. We were allowed to put it in 2023's budget. So in addition to the vehicles that we got approved for in 2022, we're going to be asking another 10 vehicles for our fleet department and law enforcement. And we're going to try and keep this going on a cycle because not only are we putting our officers at risk, we're putting the public safety at risk as well, because if we have one of these vehicles break down and transporting our prisoners to the state, that puts everybody at risk. He did mention the Bearcat. It's going to be around $500,000. That is our SWAT vehicle. And to the best of my knowledge, it broke down once on a call. We had a call for backup, and we don't want to see this happening again because
Idle time. According to the experts, idle time when it's sitting and running, it's about 30 to 35 miles for every hour that you idle. These are the figures I got from the experts years ago, and they haven't changed, so it doesn't calculate the idle time also.
Okay, so, Mr. Sheriff, I have to confess to finding the presentation a little bit hard to follow without having something written in front of me. And so, I suspect some of my colleagues might share the same sentiment. So I would like to request that you prepare this presentation in writing and try to give us greater clarity on what the differences were between the original 2023 budget that was passed a year ago and the 2023 budget that we're proposing now. And I would like if you could get that to the clerk by Friday so that she can distribute it to all the council members, and we'll have it well ahead of our next meeting.
You'll have it before then.
Okay.
But yeah, we'll be sure to get it to you. Donna Cleel, Sheriff's Finance Manager, and we'll get that to you within the next couple of days. But basically, in a nutshell, what we're saying is that when all the shooting's done, the budget this year, once they add the money to payroll and what they've already added, is going to be $163 million. That's what it's going to be this year when everything's paid. What they're giving us next year is 149, and we're projecting it to be 177. That's with the 3% raises and everything. So basically what we're saying, and we'll get this all to you in writing and explain it better, we're saying we feel we're going to fall another 25 million short. And if you look at 2022, from what we were originally approved, they put 11 million in August, and now they're going to have to add another 16 million to finish up the year for payroll. That's 27 million. That was 22. We're projecting that we're going to fall 25 million short next year because they're actually giving us 149 next year when this year alone is costing us 163.
So when you talk about this 149 number, is that the number that's in the currently existing biennial budget that was passed last year?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And that's actually, and they added more to that. What was currently in the budget that was passed last year, I don't have that in front of me, but they added another 12 million in. So the 149, so what was passed last year, right, that was for 22, but for 23, they just added another 12 million in. So what was currently, and if that's 149, so I'm assuming 137 is what was passed. They added 12 million in, and which brought us to the 149, and we're saying it's going to be 177. And we're basing a lot of that off this year, off the overtime costs and things like that, because again, this year is going to be 163 when all is said and done on December 31st.
So, you said that the original budget for 22 was 135 million.
Correct.
And then 11 million was added for Metro, bringing it to 146.
Correct.
But the actual is going to be 163, so it's a $15 million difference.
Right, and most of
And
that's
can-
in payroll, I'm sorry.
My question was, what accounts for the 15 million?
Most of that is in payroll, a lot of overtime, a lot of short staff, so it's a lot of overtime. And a lot of it is too, if you remember back when the budget was presented back in 21 for 22, our budget was cut significantly. A lot of that was based on money that was adjusted out of our budget because of the CARES money and the ARPA money, but it was cut about $10 million. And at the time, we went along with it. I remember Councilman Gallagher didn't like it at all, but we went along with it. And we knew we were going to fall short in payroll because we were cut so drastically initially. And now we're at that point where we have to make that up on top of all the raises that came this year. I know the CO's got some significant raises, and so did our law enforcement. So that's 16 million we're still short. That's all, pretty much all of it is in personnel.
So when was it that we adopted the new schedule on the correction officers?
That I don't know. Is Rhonda here? No. I don't know when it was.
It was sometime this year.
Yes,
is
it
that-
was. Yes, it was. It was.
So what we have is that we had these higher salaries for part of this year, but then we're going to have them for all of next year.
Correct.
So given that, I'm not surprised that you're estimating 12 million above the estimated 2022 actual. I mean, given the changes in salary schedules that we've made, plus the 4.66 that's being, or I think it was 6% that we're doing pretty much across the board. It intuitively seems like a reasonable estimate.
Right, I'm estimating about 16 million deficit in payroll next year, in the payroll from what they're proposing, and then we're estimating another 9 million in deficits in what we just call other, which is pretty much everything other than payroll.
So, how much money are you provided in the 2023 proposed update?
149,856. And we're saying we're going to be based on this year and on historical data, we're going to be at 175. So that's why we're at about the $25 million shortfall for 2023. That's what we're projecting. And we'll be, because like I said, right now, they're talking about 16 million right now alone in payroll for the sheriff's department that needs to go into that budget. We'll be right back there next year. And then, again, they've already added an 11 million in earlier in the year.
I'd like to call forward Director Parfiowicz.
Yes, Councilman Miller.
Given that they're projecting 2022 actual of 163 million, how can the 2023 budget update be 149 million?
The difference there is overtime. Overtime is not included in the budget. It was not included when we passed the 2022-2023 budget.
As I recall, it's been our past practice to make an estimate of what the overtime requirements are going to be and to include that in the personnel numbers. Sometimes they run hot and sometimes they run cold, but it's not just eliminated.
Overtime was not included in anyone's budget when we passed the biennial budget. So currently we're projecting, this will be issued in the third quarter report, that overall on an all funds basis. That the sheriff will overspend the budget by approximately $5 million.
So, what's your office's current estimate for the 2022 actual?
22 actual, the estimate is 163.2 million.
So you're in agreement with their number?
No, I think their number is significantly higher than my number.
Oh, no, they said the 2022 actual was going to be 163 million, and I heard you say the same thing.
My estimate is 163.2 million on a budget of 158.3 million.
Uh-huh,
The
okay.
variance being 4.9 million.
Just on that point,
We're going to go to questions by my colleagues. I'm done for, and who was it that?
I just wanted to
Sweeney
point,
was
but then you can
first.
put me
Okay.
down after the chairman.
Okay.
Just, Director, you mentioned that the sheriff's office is going to go over $5 million on their budget,
Correct.
but that does not include overtime. So you're assuming,
That does include overtime.
well, that does include overtime
Yes.
on this round right here. Okay, because when you first said it, you were saying in the budget we passed, no overtime was.
Yeah, when the budget was passed, Councilman Sweeney, there was no overtime included in the sheriff's number.
Okay, and now in this,
In my calculation for the
This
projection for this year,
adjustment.
it does include overtime, and we're projecting that they're going to overspend by about $5 million.
got it. And can you tell me what why we included it, didn't include it last time and included it in this time?
Let me, Councilman Sweeney, I think we're talking different things. The budget didn't include overtime, but
This
the
amendment, got
actual
it.
spending does include overtime.
Got it. Put me down after Mr. Gallagher.
Councilman Gallagher.
I think this is going to be a recurring theme throughout these budget analyses. I was very vocal that directors would come in front of this council underestimating what they actually needed. That has proved to be true. I could guess why. I don't know why, but I could guess why and probably be right. In essence, it was they were bogus estimates to keep the numbers down. So now we're going to pay the piper, and I think we're going to hear this throughout these reviews. And I would hope going forward, if you're in the position that you are today, that you would be a little bit more aggressive with the truth to this council as far as what people need and what we should be budgeting. We way underestimated for, again, I don't know why. I think it was to look good for whatever reason. And people come back piecemeal, which is why we said on the record, is this all you need? Don't come back here looking for more money. In essence, putting them in a bad spot. And that wasn't a spot we put them in. They put themselves in that because I suspect through the administration, they were told, you're on a lower level. You're going to go in for a lower level, and we're going to live with it as best we can. We all know that the overtime with the sheriff's office is a moving target, and at best, we should be overestimating the need for overtime with the sheriff's department. And to underestimate or not provide that in an initial thought when we're doing budget requests is really not fair to everybody up here, and especially those directors and the sheriff and everybody else that has to go back to their people and try and keep down overtime when they know they can't. You know, I saw it coming. I think some of my colleagues saw it coming, and now we're seeing it. And it's not fair that we have to hear these stories of 10 million, 12 million, 15 million. And I'm going to tell you right now, you think their number's high? I think it's low. Because starting next year, and we're already in it, we're in this recession, numbers are going to go up. Food's going to go up. Heating's going to go, everything's going to go up. What affects our homes affects the county. So I think it was just incredibly unfair to put council in a position to question the authenticity of people come in front of us with the concern that they had to say what they had to say to maintain their positions within the county. Completely unfair. I hope we get away from that in the future. And I got a feeling we're going to be hearing this throughout.
Councilman Gallagher, the one thing that I will just say is that we did budget for a good 100 or so vacancies in the corrections officer, so to offset some of that.
And I understand, and I remember that, but even that was low. An understanding that we weren't going to fill them, but there's that what if? Then their budget's blown. And in that case, I'd love to have it blown and move forward. But they weren't the only ones. Every single division that came up in front of us, for the most part, the separately elected were different, but that are on the administration came in low. I suspected they were low. Some of my colleagues suspected they were low. We made sure that they understood what they were doing and what they were going to live with. And I don't think we need to be put in that position where we're questioning the character of the directors coming in front of us to provide us with something that we're not certain is accurate. It's happened before, and I just hope it stops.
Other questions for the sheriff? Council President.
Okay. So the vacancies, those dollars you believe are going to cover for the, will cover?
I believe the vacancies do cover a good portion. I still show that we have a variance of about $5 million this year.
Okay. Can you tell us why back in the budget time when we discussed this, that you did not share the overtime at that time? Why was not included?
I believe it was shared. It was shared, but it was also shared that the overtime and the vacancies could potentially offset one another.
One other question, if I might, Mr. Chairman. Tell us how the retention and recruitment, have those numbers improved with the increase, and this is for the sheriff actually, have those numbers improved, your retention and your recruitment of COs, now that they've received that increase?
Recruitment and hiring has been steady. Retention is the battle. We made some changes, like sending them to the Corrections Academy upon being hired, so they're better prepared for the environment that they're going to be going into. And that's the main one.
Sheriff Hammett,
Microphone.
can you speak into the microphone, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. We've had some success hiring. We've had difficulty retaining. We made some changes. We implemented some new programs. Like I just stated, we're going to send them to the Cadet Training Academy upon being hired. We're also in the process of developing a cadet program for those who spend 2 years in the corrections facility. You can take the deputy's exam, and we'll pay the cost while you're in the academy. So we're hoping that will enhance our retainment of qualified individuals and help us keep adequate staffing.
So you've seen some positive movement in the recruitment, but still challenges with the retention.
Yes.
So if it increased salaries, you're still having challenges with the retention. Can you give us briefly what you attribute some of the concerns? Give us a sense of, if it's not money, tell us, give us a sense of what's causing the retention to be an issue still.
Well, excuse me, I just read an article recently written by, I believe, the Buckeye Sheriff's Association, and just about every sheriff's department across Ohio are experiencing the same challenges with retention. In our area, I can't put my thumb on it. Some of the people who haven't made it, I think a lot of it has to do with our training that they haven't been attending, perhaps our field training. Are we missing something there when we pair them with people? Are we giving them too much too soon? We're constantly looking at all these things because it could be an intimidating environment if, if it's something, if you're expecting something that you saw on TV, then you come into the real world, it can be a very intimidating environment. So I suspect that may be a little bit of it. It's not money. It doesn't seem like it's money based on some of our exit interviews.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So, to the sheriff, am I correct that that because of the vacancies that we've had because of the retention challenges, that saved us some money, but that this was partially offset by having lower staffing levels has required you to use more overtime? And am I correct in that analysis?
Absolutely. That's it.
And
Yeah.
other questions for the sheriff, Councilman Sweeney?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sheriff, welcome.
Yes, sir.
The jail needs improvements. Understatement?
Yes.
And it's going to be on you
You got it.
to try to tell us how this is going to be run. We've talked about this a long time since I've been here. And even before I've been here, the jail has been a topic of concern, to put it mildly. And we have given the authority to have the sheriff's department, or the sheriff have a HR department under his control, a step in the process of running the jail. We've always had the debate of a appointed sheriff, a elected sheriff, and the whole time the discussion, the jail kept needing improvements. So I've been talking to you and to other folks on it's time to try to improve the jail. And whatever you are thinking right now, it's not the time to be picking around the corners. What do you think you need to improve this jail? Should be shared with your staff, and then when you come back up to talk to my president, my chairman, and my chairman, tell us what you believe, because it's going to be on the sheriff, and that sheriff right now is you. So this is not a soapbox. I just wanted to emphasize that budgetarily is a big importance, but also, as you said, it's not always about the money. It's about your leadership style, which I fully support.
So before the sheriff answers that question, I'm just going to mention that I told the sheriff at 11 o'clock this morning at the Board of Control that I was going to ask practically the same question. So the sheriff has had some time to think about it, and I hope that he's going to give us a really good answer.
And Councilman Miller, I didn't need an hour to think about it. I could have answered you right then and there. Before we start spending money, we need a comprehensive workload assessment of the entire jail, from staffing to programming to security measures to the structure to training. We need someone who's an expert to come in here. I can spout out what I've read about staffing levels. It says anywhere from 40 to 49 beds per CO. Well, it doesn't take into consideration the physical dynamics, the physical characteristics of the structure. It doesn't take into consideration the classification of our inmates who are, we got some bad people in our jail. So we need to know where to start. What should our staffing levels be? We throw out numbers all the time. We should have 600, 700, 800. Why don't we have someone come in here, look at our jail, look at our food preparation, look at everything just like we did in police departments, and tell us exactly what a professional jail should look like from top to bottom. Before we spend a penny, we should have a professional assessment. That's long term. Immediately, we've already implemented some more secure access points. We're not naive enough to think that inmates are introducing all contraband into the jail. So we do jail shakedowns, which are cell-to-cell searches. We need to be more vigorous with those. We need to do them more often. We've discussed adding canines. We already have 2. We have 4 handlers and 2 canines. We've discussed that. That's something we can do probably on a short-term basis. But if we want to make permanent changes, we need someone to come in here and tell us whether we're doing things right or wrong. We have 2 jails. We have one warden. Do we need 2 wardens? Do we need majors and things like that, like they have in Franklin and Summit County? I don't claim to be a jail expert, and there are people who do this for a living. I have some ideals how to make things safer, and we've implemented them, but I think we really need someone to come in and look at our facility and tell us how to make it as good as any facility in the country.
Thank you. And for the record, Councilman Tron had a conflict of schedule that was in place prior to when this meeting was announced, but has now joined the meeting and is with us. Anything further, Councilman Sweeney?
No, thank you.
Any follow-up? Okay. Anybody else? Councilman Gallagher.
Sheriff, I got to tell you, I got to wonder about that last answer you gave. I don't know how many experts we need to have go through that jail.
I haven't seen a report, a comprehensive report that tells me what we need.
I have.
I'd like to get a copy of that if I
have.
could.
And I sat on my butt for 3 years watching all this unfold. And the physical building itself, at best, as we've just recently heard in public testimony, is 5 years. You're not talking about the physical building, you're talking about staff.
Yes, if it's a flat staff like Franklin,
Right.
staffing levels are different. Then we got multiple floors, we got the courtrooms, we have to get them back and forth. What do we need for a building with the characteristics of ours? Maybe we need less. I mean, I'm not sure. I know what number I come up with, but I'm not the expert on jail staffing.
Well, I mean, the proof's in the pudding, and we've been slurping on that for 3 years. And the unfortunate reality of where we are today doesn't fix what we need to have fixed, and certainly doesn't get you to where you need to get to. So I would agree that a comprehensive direction needs to be done. We had that. We don't now. So, you know, that was a little confusing to me to hear what you were saying, because I don't think what you need and what we would want is going to make much of a difference in that facility as it stands. So going forward, obviously with the new administration, after they, you know, start this process all over again in whatever direction they take, that's where we're going to go. But it was just confusing for me to listen to that. And I'll take you through what we have. I mean, we've way before you and probably 4 sheriffs ago, we went through this, and a lot of those got lost in the shuffle. But we do have legal documents now that have given us direction as far as concerns with safety and going forward. So we'll share those with you as best we can.
I'd appreciate that.
And not an easy. And I think the frustration the council has is it's we were there and now we're not there. So what can we do to Band-Aid this thing until we do get there? And quite honestly, I don't have that answer anymore, and I don't think you do, and I don't think any of us do, and we're going to have to sit and wait and let other people figure it out. Thanks.
Mr. Chair. Councilwoman Turner.
I'll yield to my beautiful colleague.
I was going to yield to my beautiful colleague. So, okay, I
Okay,
just have
Ms.
a
Simon.
question on the dogs, the canines. What kind of budget, can you provide a budget for 2 more dogs, what that would be?
Sure, I don't want to.
Donna, well.
It probably depends on the breed, and I don't want to get into cost
But you
because I
can
don't
get
give you
us,
bad
you can get me that.
Oh,
their
absolutely.
staff. Okay,
Yeah.
that would
Oh,
be
yeah.
great. That would be
Yeah.
helpful, correct? To have additional canines in there?
Well, Donna might have it.
What I can tell you about the canines is the purchase of 2 canines, and that's with training the handler. Each canine is somewhere in the area, I'm pretty sure it's like $13,000. And that's per dog.
Yeah.
And that's with, and that's with the training for the handler and everything. And then, of course, throughout the year, there's all the vet services and the feeding and things like that. I don't have that number in front of me. I can get it for you per dog, but just the purchase. And then it all depends too, if these dogs, if we're talking jail dogs or law enforcement dogs, if
Or
we're
the
gonna.
type of training. If they're utility dogs, they can do everything. The training's more expensive. If they're bomb dogs, the training is one cost, and if they're just what we want them to do for the jail, it may be a different cost. So 13, that's kind of low, but
Through the chair, so just let us know what's most useful to your needs and what that cost estimate would be. And I know the bomb dog I've been working on for years, and finally we have that dog. And how beneficial is that?
The bomb.
Yes.
I don't, I
Who's
can't-
handling that? Not your
We've
department.
used them as utility dogs. but,
Okay.
they've been very successful with searches, and they've found contraband. I don't remember a time when we sent them back there that they didn't find what we were looking for or put us in the right direction. So they've been very successful.
So my colleagues know, in the past, we have not had our own bomb dog. We had to borrow from Homeland Security when there were big events here, like the RNC and big events here. We didn't, or convention center events, we didn't have our own dog. So we had to like get on a list to get help to put on these big events. And so it's been really great that now we have our own.
And I will get you the prices of, like he said, it all depends on the training. But one other thing to keep in mind too, as you get more dogs, you may or may not need more dog vehicles and the vehicle build outs and things like that, because if you have to transport these dogs, so you may need additional vehicles that are set up for the canines.
Sure, just let us know what you need.
I will do that.
That will be helpful to you in the meantime.
You will have all this week.
Okay, thank you.
Correct.
So, Ms. Khalil, any of this follow-up information, if you could send it to the clerk so that she can circulate it to all the council members.
Absolutely, I will do
Okay,
that.
Thank you. Ms. Turner.
Thank you, Chairman. Sheriff, thank you and all the hard-working men and women of your department for all that you do.
you.
I've also met your canines. They are the most adorable top dogs I have ever seen. Thank you for hosting me on multiple occasions. Give my thanks to the wardens and assistant wardens and administrator. I had a quick question about, and we've heard about the deficits and overages and adjustments that we're going to have to make in terms of your budget. Can you talk a little bit about the addition of having a human resources department and how that's working out for you?
Well, it's working out well. You mean financially or operationally?
Both.
Operationally, it's working out well. Our HR director, she's bright. She's had some really innovative ideas, such as the cadet program, a mentoring program, things like that. She's come up with some really good ideas in in the short amount of time she's been there. We haven't gotten around to filling all the positions that we need to fill. We're still working on that. We didn't think it would happen overnight. So the cost associated with that is projected. What's the projection for those? New HR department. It's about $400,000. I saw somewhere in here. Oh, here it is.
Yep.
Okay.
So million and then so about 1.5.
Yeah, we're looking at about 1.5 for
That's
both of
new,
these.
Or is this going to be a transfer?
These are the ones that already exist. These are the transfers. So an additional $466,000. Excuse me.
Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll get you those documents.
And next we have Director Jacqueline Fletcher, DCFS.
Afternoon, Council. I have a PowerPoint.
For DCFS, we have a written document.
Ms. Fletcher, if you use the clicker that's right next to you, you can go through your slides, the green button.
Green button. Great. Thank you. Again, thank you, Council, for inviting me out to talk about our budget impacts for 2022-2023. I decided to try and put together just a brief recap for you. This works. Green button. Stuff never works with me. Okay, so just in general, just wanted to start with just a general overview of the agency in terms of just pointing out that keeping children safe from abuse and neglect requires the assistance of many different partners, ranging from our mandated reporters, our concerned neighbors and family members, to our specially trained child protection specialists and our supervisors, I might add. So just wanted to point that out as we see that one of our bigger sort of impacts for next year is the increase in salaries for our child protection worker or social service worker series. And now? Okay. Oh, great. Yep. Thank you. Thank you. So when I came on board in July of this year, we had nearly 2,400 kiddos in care in our custody. And we know turnover in child welfare has been a consistent challenge for so many organizations. And here in Cuyahoga County, we're not immune to what's going on in our workforce crisis. So I kind of wanted to put together some quick data around what we were seeing in terms of turnover. 40% turnover being experienced with our new hires, beginning from, we looked at 2020 to 2022. So that was around 40% turnover. To date, we've had 103 resignations. That's workers in our social service series, as well as case reassignments. I wanted to point that out because that's huge, right? In child welfare, if you have to reassign cases constantly because of turnover, that impacts families. It also impacts the morale of our staff because they're seeing their peers leave, and then they're, having to pick up the cases. And for the most part, our supervisors then have to, help that new staff understand what's going on with the family and where things stand. I think the median turnover rate for frontline staff in 2015, I believe it was around 25%. So you can see where we were. And so, again, all of these retention concerns were included pretty much in part in the recommendations that you guys received around the budget adjustments for salaries. And so the executive recommendations included $2.2 million for CPS workers, additional CPS specialists, and that 1.6 for Say Yes for the full 104 schools. And then the council amendments was 2.2 to hire 37 additional CPS workers to take us up from 453 to 490. And then the 2023 budget adjustment, again, we're looking at the 4.3, a little over that for our increases in salaries for the social service workers, as well as the 3.3 for Say Yes, not to exceed 3.3 for Say Yes. And so just kind of wanted to give you guys an update on where things stand with our child protection worker staffing levels. We have an FTE count of 490. Our fill positions are 357, and our vacant positions stand at 133, which is down from a high. I believe it was a little over 160 at some point. So that number is coming down. We welcomed 17 new hires on the 7th of this month. And our final new worker class for this year begins on the 5th of December. And so we're hoping to bring in 8 new worker classes for next year, which is going to be significant for us, I believe.
How many typically per class?
Yeah, on average, around 15, but if we can get more in there, we're hoping we see a huge increase.
Okay.
And so, I added this just because I really think it's going to be important to be strategic in what we do moving forward. So, the first thing I added was beyond compensation. We're going to hear a lot about that, right? So, what does it mean to look beyond that conversation about wages? What does our work environment improvements need to look like to retain staff? I think the sheriff talked about retention. Retention is going to be huge. But as I move forward in this work, there's some areas that I believe will require much attention. How do we measure the impact of all these various workforce strategies or interventions, right? That's a big question for me. What does our hiring or onboarding process look like? Are we meeting the candidates' expectations as we bring them in? How do we evaluate how much stress is being impacted or felt as turnover, hopefully starts to come down? But we need to be able to measure that. Right now, we could have in terms of the exit interviews, we can have at least 3 opportunities. If you were to resign from DCFS today, you may be approached by the state for an exit interview, our internal teams, HR or other folks in our CQI department, as well as the county-wide surveys that are going out. So those are 3 different opportunities that folks typically don't sit down for either. So we have to figure out how to streamline that process to get some good quality data in there to be able to measure what's happening on the ground. I added staff performance because I think that's going to be huge, just to look at the support we're providing all levels of staff, what's needed, where are the gaps and barriers, as well as our critical outcomes for kids and families. We can never lose sight of that. So I just wanted to make sure that we are going to develop a strategic, plan to prioritize how do we address the retention issue, because the wages are going to get us there maybe 10% of the way to attract people into this field, but it won't keep them there if I don't understand what's driving folks out the door. I'll take questions.
Questions, Councilman Tron?
The key thing that happens usually when somebody's being driven out the door is the exit interview and how that goes and what do we do. And of those folks who have left based on these numbers, how many exit interviews do we do?
That's a good question. I'm trying to get a good handle on that. I believe the second quarter data from the state, we had 47 exits between quarter 1 and 2, and I believe 20 participated in an exit interview.
And how many of those did you conduct?
I don't believe we conducted. I believe we did 4, and I can double check and get back to you and verify the number from our HR department.
If it's a senior management issue, it's not an HR issue. It's a senior management issue. And if you listed compensation as beyond compensation, meaning that there are things beyond the compensation, and I agree with your slide, then it really is, senior management needs to find out what are those driving factors. Because if you're going to turn this around, not by dollars, but you're going to turn it around by raising a higher level of public awareness. You're going to say there's a bigger social need for what you're doing than just the dollars. You're giving back to society by doing this. Whatever you find to be the issue, but it seems to me it's you have a sales issue here as much sales and marketing issue. You do anything else, and until you get your messaging right, until you find out what the messages need to be, you're going to be swinging at fences. I really think so. My suggestion would be TV commercial from years ago.
Mr. Schwan?
Yes.
If you could speak louder in the microphone, please.
No, it's on. It's just I wasn't close enough to it. Yeah. There's a TV commercial that was done years ago when a business had lost its market. And the CEO handed out airline tickets to all the people to go and make interviews and find out what was going on. And they said, what are you going to do? And he took the toughest ones and took those in his airline's tickets to go out and talk to those customers. You should take the toughest ones yourself and find out what's going on. Just a suggestion. Thank you.
I appreciate that. I think I did get a little bit of feedback in terms of 67% of those that did respond pointed to management issues. And that delineated into.
Bingo.
So yep. We'll work on that. Bless you.
Could you be a little more specific on what kind of management issues they pointed out?
So I believe they pointed to, which I don't necessarily believe is a management issue, but caseload sizes. That was a significant concern. They talked about, managers, supervisors aren't nice. The environment, really, they don't feel supported in the environment that they're working in. I think some of them talked about they didn't have a good understanding of what they were walking into. And the onboarding process, they didn't feel like they got enough training, enough resources to be able to do the job. It is a highly stressful, I know you all know that, it's a highly stressful environment. And so some of what I believe the sheriff also pointed to is, folks not maybe understanding what it's going to take to go out into the districts and engage with families. And when it's necessary to remove a child, that's a tough decision and action to take, but you have to know you can do that when the time comes if that's needed. So that was part of it, and we can look a little deeper into the data. We don't have a lot of numbers to go on, and again, I'm hoping to stem the tide of the exits, but as they do come, we need quality data so that we can drill down deeper into those management issues that many are pointing to.
Chairman?
Yes.
If I could, through the chair to the director. So as far as management goes, what is currently the training for new employees coming into a situation like this? Is it, a 2-week thing? Is it a month thing? Are they on a probationary period? How's that work?
They're in probation. We're doing sort of a hybrid. So it's a roughly 6-week training module where they're getting most of their core training. Those are the state required trainings around how to do an investigation, how to engage with families, legal, and all those aspects. So it's roughly 6 weeks before they are receiving their first case. I met a couple today. They're still shadowing. They came in last month. So we try to give them sort of a blended experience where they're out in the district, they're shadowing with some peers, they're getting real life experiences. They also, we also have VR goggles. And so when candidates even come in through the door, they're able to do an interactive home visit and make some decisions to help us figure things out in terms of where their skill set.
Or do you think those who are doing the training perhaps need like a refresher course in training? So just as an example, I'm not going to name the company, but somebody came out to do a repair, an office repair the other day. And he came out and he just, for the 15 minutes he was there, bashed his company, and he was frustrated, obviously, for whatever reason, but, these guys should have told you this and they didn't do that. They do that to everybody. I'm just wondering if you think there may be some of that going on because maybe they need, a little bit of, I don't know what the word is, but a little bit of, comfort or,
Right.
Maybe I'm just thinking if you look at the overall process,
When you get away from, direct service practice and being in the field, there may be some of that. We've been meeting with our training partners to talk about, how do we really engage candidates from the gate? And if those staff who are working in training, many of them used to work direct service in the field, how do they continue on with that candidate throughout the life of their onboarding process and not just a one-time, bring them in and send them on their way. So we're working on some edits to the training modules. We definitely see that there's more support that they're asking for, so we are trying to meet them where they are.
Okay, I appreciate that. I mean, it's obviously, as Mr. Schron said, it's a difficult process. It's almost an art, more of a science, in some instances.
Absolutely.
So, Director, I have a couple of questions. First of all, the budget update has a number put in for DCFS at 95,700,000.
Councilmember Miller, we can't hear you.
the budget update has a number written in of $95,753,664, which is a 4.2 million increase over the number from the biennial budget. My question is whether that's a number that you're satisfied with, that you can operate your department effectively on that number, or is there an issue?
You know, as I continue, and I'm just going to be fully transparent here, I'm trying to dig into the numbers. It's similar to, I think, again, I'll point to my colleague in the sheriff's office. What does it really take to operate a child welfare agency of this magnitude, in terms of salary, in terms of size? As I look at our partners across, maybe Hamilton and Franklin, we have a significant number of children coming into care over and above what we're seeing in Franklin County or Hamilton County. Why is that? Trying to understand that. And so if we can dig into those numbers a little bit more to see what's happening on the front end, that 4.2 million, may be the right size. It may not be what we need. We may need more. I'm not certainly sure right now, but I'm just trying to get a handle on what is the right size. How do we realign our resources if we're sort of overutilized on the back end? I'll just point out briefly, as we're seeing more kids get maybe stalled in the system because of the turnover, more kids are in our permanent custody, which means now we owe them a family. And then that could potentially be them aging out of foster care. Foster care should be uncommon. And so, that's a long way around the answer to your question. I don't know. I believe the 4.2 at this moment is kind of where in line with what I'm seeing, but I need to do some more analysis.
So, first I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Vice President Stevens at the meeting. And my next question is that, to my mind, the 357 out of 490, I mean, that's a scary low number, and to my way of thinking. And you talked about having 8 classes of typically about 15 each, and even if all 15 for each class completed their training successfully and onboarded, which probably doesn't happen, that would be 120. And if you had a 25% departure rate on the 357, that would be 89 departures. And so even if you had that fully successful recruitment effort, it would only improve your situation by 31.
Right.
And so my question is, have you thought about and do you have any strategy for creating a more rapid closing of the gap in getting your staffing number closer to the intended 490?
So what we've talked about is that 15 is sort of the average that we've seen prior to the starting wage increase. Again, when we were able to advertise the increase, that was the end of September. Council approved that increase. We immediately advertised the starting wage increase, and we saw over 60 plus folks show up for our open house in October, and 50 candidates walked away with a conditional offer of employment. Again, we're working with PRC, we're working with HR, all of our internal staff to be able to onboard. If those 50 people were to complete their testing, complete all the background screening, and we're ready to go for that next class on December 5th, we're going to onboard 50 people. We're not going to say, you know, best practice is 10 folks in a training class. We'll train, I'll get out there and train, whatever we need to do to make sure candidates aren't sitting on a wait list. And so we just have to, you know, this is early on in the process, trying to make sure that training is prepared and available. We have West Shore, which has tons of space over there to open up training classrooms. If I get 30 people, we're going to onboard 30 folks.
Do we have the organizational capacity to train 50 people at a time?
Again, what we've talked about is trying to figure out what additional infrastructure supports we can provide our training resources. So we have supervisors and managers who have history with the agency. We can ebb and flow. The state has also provided, online courses. So we can sort of mix and match the training to meet the candidates' needs. We've also talked about if we have candidates coming in, I believe we have somebody from Franklin County, that candidate may not need the full-scale training that another candidate may need. So we just have to make sure we're being flexible. I think that's one of the biggest variances in being able to onboard a higher candidate pool, is just to be flexible with them.
Other questions by my colleagues?
Director, I'd like to have copies of, maybe redacted copies of those exit interviews that you mentioned. But also with not just the exit interviews, are there interviews or written documentation with the existing staff as to what they think they need in terms of being supported? Is that part of the mix of what you do?
So that's a great question. As we've been working with the state and others around this workforce crisis, because again, it's being felt across the nation. One thing that we decided to do as we were looking at some workforce grants is take this to the staff and ask them directly, what is it that you believe is needed in terms of retention? And they overwhelmingly pointed to the work environment. The space that we're working in is sort of outdated. Our workstations are pretty much obsolete. I believe the carpet in the building has been there since 1997. And so the staff were very vocal in saying those are the things that's going to help keep us here, is feeling valued. And so we do have those survey results that I can share with you.
Feeling valued simply from the place of being given a quality workstation.
Workstations, and they also pointed to technology as well. So RightSpeak is a technology that will help transcribe their activity logs so that they're not, doing all the typing and, going to somewhere and find somewhere to sit. They can talk it into this app, and it will transcribe their activity logs. Many other jurisdictions are already using it. We're a little bit behind.
So that supports them in actually doing their work.
Absolutely.
And so although many jobs are difficult, in the end, it's just the level of support that they're given in the midst of a difficult job.
It's, again, highly stressful situation that our staff are finding themselves in. And for them to say, if you can replace carpet for, this would go a long way. I don't think that's too much to ask.
And you may have already said this, but I just didn't catch the number. You received an increase as well, just like in the corrections officers. What is that number again of?
So the increase for our social service worker series is $4,357,629.
Okay. And how many social workers do we have?
Currently, we have 357 positions filled.
And the target number was?
The target is 490.
So the vacants are the difference there. So during our last budget discussion, the administration, actually with the COs as well, wanted to remove those So it's good that this council left them in place, because are you dealing with overtime as well, like with the correction officer? Is overtime a significant factor as well?
We have a little bit of that going on in terms of, we're, again, 24/7, so making sure we have available staff to be there as kids are coming in. We're seeing more juvenile Rule 6, that's when law enforcement bring a youth into the building any time of the day and or night. And so we have to make sure that our hotline calls are being covered, as well as any child care support that's needed. So we have a rotating shift of folks who are signing up to be able to handle anything that would come into the building at any time.
Do you know what your overtime dollar amount is?
I don't know, but I can get that.
And I don't know if Director Parfiowicz knows. No.
Councilman Jones, I don't have the number. I mean,
You have a general sense if it's still within the budget?
I think overall that Children and Family Services is okay compared to budget, but if you recall, I believe council did add social workers as well last year to the Children and Family Services budget, so there should be some room there.
Right, and had we not done that, we'd be looking at a greater challenge now.
Potentially. I mean, I'm still showing that Human Services in the aggregate will underspend at third quarter by $25 million.
So, Director, what's your current estimate for 2022 actuals for DCFS?
No, Councilman Miller, I don't have it with me. I just have the department in total for the Department of Health and Human Services. It's considered a division of Health and Human Services. I can give you the number.
Okay, please do. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I might finish?
Yes, continue.
Another question. In your second slide, executive recommendations, the 1.6 million to Say Yes to Education, that is the HHS dollars for those family support specialists in 104 schools?
That's correct.
The 2.2 million, is that the money that was to be used for to reimburse the Title IV contribution?
No, the 2.2 million was to hire those additional 37 social workers that council added to their budget.
Okay, and help me connect or disconnect the idea that the original plan, which was to provide 1.6 million, which we are still looking to do, but also we were to upfront the Title IV monies. We were not to pay Say Yes to Education. We were to upfront and be reimbursed by Title IV.
Correct. It was more, Councilman Jones's reimbursement from Title IV that has not come to fruition.
This 2.2 does not reflect that. That's
No.
not, okay, I just wanted to make sure that was, okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilman Shrine.
Thank you. I appreciate the fact that you're looking at things like VR and stuff of that nature, that, and even something, the simple stuff like the carpet. But I don't see it on your list of strategic priorities is better communication. And I'd be willing to bet if you actually ask, I've never been to an organization yet that communication wasn't number 1 or 2, and it doesn't even make it on the list of your 6 priorities. I would highly suggest that, whether it be weekly, monthly, daily, flash meetings in the morning, whatever technique is to let them know what's coming, what the expectation is, because you were saying things like they're not sure what their expectation is. Well, that's a communication issue. Right. They're not sure about their training. Well, that's, obviously those are all things like that. So if you can find a way to make sure that moves up and elevates it to the number 1 or number 2 position, salary is usually number 3 or 4, and communications of any organization, if you ask them what could be improved or what should be improved, almost invariably it's going to be communication, whether it's your church, your synagogue, your group, or whatever it happens to be. So I would highly suggest you go back and look at your 6 priorities, and I'd be willing to bet that you will find that there'll be a 7th one there someplace along the way, that it moves up in your strategic priorities. Thank you.
You, Councilman. I believe that was an oversight for me when I say beyond compensation. That's one of the variances that I've adopted since I came on board in July is to improve the communication with staff. Sitting in front of them as often as I can. We have monthly focus groups where they can come in and just talk about what's happening on the ground. We can provide some updates to them. Our newsletter, my newsletter that goes out to them as well. And so I did miss it. I wanted to go and see my daughter who lives out of state this month. But trying to make sure we're getting in front of staff as often and as frequent as possible. I don't think we can over communicate.
No.
So
you
you're right in line with what where I'm comfortable is just really sitting in front of people and hearing their concerns, hearing the challenges that they have. Because again, I would have never known that the carpet has been there since '97, and the worker actually said I was there when they were putting it in. So, and another worker actually showed me where he wrote his name on a desk when he came in 20 years ago. It's still there. So
Yeah,
thank
well,
you for that.
I highly suggest that, and tell your senior management, put your walking shoes on and be walking with the, management or walking around is usually the best, with a cup of coffee, just meeting the people on wherever they are, whether it's talking with a client, just getting on the streets. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes.
David Merriman on behalf of the Department of Health and Human Services. I know this is Jackie Fletcher's presentation, but I need to jump in on the point of communication and acknowledge that in the time that since Jackie has been the interim director, she's had more open forums, more second shift open forums, more staff, just conversations than I would say the prior director in the prior year. And that's just since July. Now, I'll acknowledge that's also during the period when COVID was on, but I don't think that there's much more that can be done by Jackie to engage her staff. She's also invited counsel to sit in some of those open forums. So I think she's in some ways being modest in describing the amount of effort that she's put into over communicating and her belief that we don't have to wait for the project to be perfectly wrapped up before we start to talk about it. We need to let staff know what's going on and why and what the status is. And I felt the need to acknowledge her for that because it has been one of her top priorities.
Fantastic. We'll look forward to hearing that same thing going on 2 years from now and continuous improvement.
But Dave, before you leave, Mr.
Yes.
Chairman, if I might.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I actually wanted to comment along the lines of Mr. Merriman that the change in the morale since you've been there is palpable. I don't sit on the committee, HHS, but I obviously am in tune with what's happening, and it's like night and day. And I just so appreciate the detail to which you look to make sure small things like the carpet or, the broken window theory, you're implementing that so people feel that they're valued and create a more welcoming workspace. And so it's noticeable and very much appreciated what you're doing.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, before.
Yes, Council President.
When I hear this conversation around, furniture and carpet and those things, it just makes me think of how from day one of our new government with all our previous administration, when it came to HHS at budget times, there's always the concept of how do you operate under your existing budget, or how do you do it for 10% less, or all those things. And although this body has always fought to try to maintain critical services, and we've had meetings with directors, and what do you need to at least make sure you're still operating. But when we hear that across the podium, director after director, I can operate within the budget that I have, or I can do it for 10% less, that's the world that just doesn't get addressed since 1998. Those are the things. So the next question is, how do we start to hear from you that in terms of when you present a budget, that these things that are actually related to a retention are actually built into the budget? So I'm saying that so that we can all think about this when that time comes under the administrations and we balance the needs for human services and economic development and all of those challenges, that we know that these things are included, or if they're not being included, and knowing their genuine connection to the retention of what we're doing. So that's not a question, but.
Okay. Anything else? Thank you very much for your service and for being with us this afternoon. And for our final presentation today, we have Director Andy Johnson from IT.
I always try to raise this and it doesn't seem to work. So thank you, Mr. Miller, for having me and to council for allowing me to present this afternoon. Andrea, can you bring up the presentation for me? Fantastic. Did we decide if this works? Yeah, there we go. All right, so there's three things that I'd like to present to you this afternoon. First is the recommended budget increase that Walter has submitted last week. Then the next two items are really our top 10 capital projects that we're going to do for 2023, and then our top 10 capital projects that we'll do after 2023. So with no further ado, we'll get into the increase in budget. And so I'd like to focus on our other expenditures. And as you'll see in the packet, our other expenditures come to a total of $960,000. And I'd like to break that down a little bit for you. And this is $960,000 above what was appropriated in the 2022-2023 cycle. And these items are also items that I came back to, I think, Mr. Miller, your Finance Committee, and talked about things that we had missed, items that we had missed, and we asked for some additional appropriation for the 2022 fiscal year. These items that I'll talk about were part of that, and these are items that were approved in 2022 that we're looking forward to extend into 2023. So the first item there is from our IT security group, and that is incident response. Incident response was something that was in the budget, I'm told, in the 2018-2019 cycle. It was eliminated in the 2020-2021 cycle. However, CARES came along and took that incident response and paid for incident response at that point. So what we're asking for is 2022 and 2023 that around $200,000 be added to the budget to handle incident response. What I mean by incident response, that is when there is some sort of breach in our security. How do we handle that, right? Fortunately, right now, we haven't had that. The county has no experience in how do we negotiate that? How do we manage it? How do we triage it? How do we do the forensics to figure out what happened? This money is used just for that. But it's also not an insurance policy. We also get active training out of that $200,000. So our team is training on what to look for, what to understand, and how to handle an incident response. One other item also is an assessment as part of that $200,000. These companies will come out and they will assess how prepared are you for some type of incident. So $200,000 that we'd like to add to the budget for 23 for that particular item. Mr. Miller, I can keep going or I can stop for some.
Please continue.
Okay, great. The next item, so there's three. The second of the three is our Microsoft agreement. So with Microsoft, there are a couple items that weren't part of the 22 budget that we asked for and aren't part of the 23 that we're going to ask for. Microsoft is our second largest vendor at the county in terms of IT spend. And what we're asking for here is a couple of things. We're asking for some more consulting. We've increased our hours with the Microsoft security team. As you all are aware, cybersecurity is an enormous issue that we're facing. And these bad actors are getting smarter. They're getting more active. They are penetrating the slightest of weakness, and we are continually trying to stay ahead of that. And part of that is to increase and work with Microsoft, who's at the forefront of this type of prevention. I'm in no way saying that we're completely safe, or I'm guaranteeing that we won't get hacked, but these types of measures that we're taking, this money that we're asking for, is to help us avoid that, to do our best to put up defenses there. It also has some increase in Azure that was not accounted for in the original budget. And Azure is our cloud computing. And you may be aware that IT is moving from an on-prem, where we have the servers and the memory and all the processing on-prem. We have a data center for that. And we're getting away from that and we're going to the cloud. And when you go to the cloud, that presents additional challenges. And so we talk about Azure, we talk about Azure credits, we talk about consulting that will help us transition our environment from an on-prem environment to a cloud or an Azure environment. Microsoft is our partner in that space. And then the third thing that, and Mr. Miller, I kind of chuckle on this one, this is Zoom. Zoom was not part of our budget. It was funded for during the CARES Act. And while I'm a Teams proponent, Zoom does offer some advantages that Teams doesn't, particularly when we're dealing with the constituents. The average homeowner, the average constituent is much more likely to be able to interact with us via Zoom rather than Teams. And so this money was never part of the budget. I know that the 8th floor, I know that the courts rely on Zoom. So this is just a contract that we're adding to the budget to cover our Zoom licensing. And so those three items, they total about $960,000, are above and beyond what we contemplated for the 22-23 budget. They were items that we added for 22, and I'm here to ask that we consider adding those for the 2023 budget as well.
So, Director, I find Zoom more user-friendly than Teams by a wide margin. Is there something I'm missing why you're advocating for Teams?
Well, so I totally appreciate the point of Zoom being an easier tool to use. The thing with Teams, and why I'm really pushing to have that, particularly internally, is it's free to us, right? We don't pay anything more for it. It is covered in our Microsoft licensing. Teams is integrated with the Microsoft suite, Microsoft with the offices, with SharePoint, all those tools that the typical office knowledge worker uses day in, day out. Teams is a better integration with that. So Teams is what I will push for, besides the fact that it is included with our Microsoft agreement. Appreciate that Zoom is maybe an easier, and in fact, some of the technology in Zoom is maybe better than what Microsoft has. So.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't just technologically challenged. Okay, thank you.
Appreciate that.
Councilman Schwan.
Yeah, I do understand that Zoom is sometimes consumer perceived as better or easier. But as you pointed out, to Microsoft, you've already bought that product. Teams is anybody who is using Microsoft, most shops have gone to Teams, not because of one or the other. And the other one is your very first slide is your IT security. Which is more secure of those two products? Let's be realistic. Zoom's is a Chinese influenced product. It does. Yes.
I'm absolutely with you. I
know
absolutely agree.
You with me or not?
I am with you, man.
So Microsoft is the product that you control.
Yeah.
So if your first slide is your concern about security, wouldn't that also be something you want to host? It just seems to me that you're acquiescing on that.
Okay, no, I appreciate the point.
Chuckles over here, but I would ask them to do their research on that point.
I didn't say I was arguing with you. I'm just laughing at you.
Oh, okay. Well, the very first slide is security, and then the very last one is introducing a higher risk of security. So it seems to me that
I'm gonna ask a parallel question when the chair
it just strikes me as and to Mr. Miller, I appreciate that he likes Zoom because it's easier, but Microsoft Teams is becoming more and more the standard of any business process out there.
Absolutely agree.
Vice President Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Do we need to spend that much on Zoom? Because more and more people are adapting to Teams, and I use both of them, and I think that with more and more companies flipping over to Microsoft and then people using it at home as well, I don't know that we need to pay for that many licenses.
Well, you're speaking directly to my heart, and I absolutely.
I was prepared for you to say 30 to 50,000, not 110,000.
And so when we think about that number, right, it is a big number.
So you need it for the executive's office, you need it for council, you need it for your office, and you need it for some some for the courts?
Or the courts. That's really the biggest consumer of Zoom licensing. So they've embedded a lot of Zoom into their processes, and so that switch out, I think, would be very difficult. It's not a battle that we fought right now, poor choice of words. It's not something we've pushed on them. I mean, they're operating, they've got Zoom going. It's something I would like to see switch to Teams, but I think the practicality of that to disrupt what they're doing in the courts, I don't think now's quite the right time to do that. But I appreciate the fact that, yes, if we could get to everybody using Teams, I think that would be great. I will say, though, that at the home front level, if there is that interaction between, say, the county and a homeowner or a constituent, I think still Zoom is still the predominant preferred interface there. And so that's why we'd like to keep some of those licenses
I
around.
think I get that you have to have that interface with the publicly facing pieces of our organization, but I don't know that we need to spend that much. And then next I go to the Microsoft engineering. What do we need to redesign that costs us $500,000 or more?
So that's a number of things. So as we're moving from an on-prem environment, right? So we've got, when I say on-prem, I mean we've got servers and we have our memory and we have those things that you think about in the old days as what we'd have in a data center. Those types of equipment are, that's how we're designed right now as an organization. But as we start to move to the cloud, and you've heard people talking about moving to the cloud, and we are
still
doing
afraid of the cloud.
It's an exciting place to be. And so when you think about that, we no longer have to manage those servers, right? We think about disaster recovery, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Some of that's already right there with the cloud. We talk about some form of backups there in the cloud. I think about things like the Board of Election, where we don't see like a constant CPU or computer processing throughout the year. We see spikes in that. We know, in the fall we're going to have to ramp up. Well, right now that sits in our data centers, and we have to have those servers configured for almost like the maximum hit. Well, when we start to talk about the cloud, it's much easier to dial that up. We pay a little bit more when we dial it up, but then as volume drops off, we can dial that back. And so all of that goes into, we have to design all of that. And that's why there's that journey to the cloud. We have to incorporate that into our environment. And that's where those consulting fees come in.
I thought that the state law and federal law, you had to have increased barriers with our boards of elections because they do not want to be as easy for them to hack. So they were supposed to be completely separate from our other business in the clouds.
That's great point. That's absolutely right. So, and that's how you do that separation, right? You can isolate those types of environments, and that's certainly something you can do in the cloud. It's not like it's a free, everybody's out there together, right? It is very isolated, very controlled, very secured. But the other thing that I wanted to mention on that consulting is what we're seeing in the increase in cyber attacking, right? When you start to see these bad actors out there and they're getting more and more sophisticated, that's where we have to ramp up our consulting with Microsoft to stay ahead of it. We hear the stories.
Oh, no, they hacked Akron 2-3 years ago.
I get every day, there are different municipalities, there's different counties that are getting hacked, right? There's ransomware. In fact, it's a pretty prevalent activity out there. We're trying to do our best to stay ahead of it.
But is there a school for these guys?
There's training, there's people go get, they get PhDs in this sort of thing, right? It is a very, very technical, very complicated, incredible frontier out there. But we just cannot have that kind of brain power employed at the county. And that's where we need to reach out to the Microsofts to say, hey, they've got the expertise. What are you seeing? They've got that broad vision of the entire country of what's happening.
Just out of curiosity, what do they bill us per hour?
Well, that varies, and it gets a little complicated. I mean, bills can go anywhere from $100 an hour, depending on what you're asking for, to $300, $400, $500 an hour. I mean, this is expensive stuff. It's but if we're going to have a connected environment, we need to be there.
We have no choice.
Ms. Simon?
Thank you. Are we stuck with this Barracuda?
Give me a little bit more of what you're
No,
thinking.
it's just, I'm not sure everybody loves the Barracuda, but is it working effectively, and is that something we're going to stick with?
Yes, that is something that we will stick with. And in fact, we'll be talking about, but those things have a short shelf life, right? I mean, they have a 5-year shelf life, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Something we'll have to look in 5 years again. How do we replace this? So Barracuda's here to stay. You know, we'll evaluate. I mean, technologies change, right? So things change, technologies change, the environment changes. We're constantly evaluating. And again, Microsoft can help us with that. Thanks.
So, Director, the recommended budget update number for IT is $26,717,972, an increase of $1.77 million. Are you content with that number?
Yes, I am content with that number. You know, I think I've been very open and honest with everybody before that if you know, I don't want to ask for money that we don't need. I want to be at the very edge of it. And if we find something that comes up, I'm very transparent in that we'll ask you for it.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Council President.
Tell me about the Infor contract. Should we, when the time comes, do we keep it? Do we upgrade some new system?
Yeah, so you're getting a little ahead on my slides, but that's great. I mean, this is a great conversation to have. So when we think about Infor, we think about a couple things, right? We think about the licensing, because our Infor is in the cloud, right? We don't pay for any of the hardware, we just pay for the licensing. And that licensing is set to expire in 2026. And so we have to think about what are we going to do there in terms of the software itself. Are we going to convert to something else? Are we going to continue with Infor and sign another 5, 10, 3, whatever long agreement that you know, makes sense? And so we're in the process right now. I'm talking to Infor about what does that contract look like on a yearly basis after 2026. And so I don't have an answer for you right now, but that is a negotiation piece that we're on. I also have to, though, have the card in my pocket that if those numbers come back ridiculously high, then we have to move to something else. And so those are conversations that, you know, I'd much rather have sooner rather than later. And so I don't want to play my hand to Infor right now and say, yeah, we're 100% going with you. I have doing the diligence of looking at what will it take to move, or what would it take to move to other packages.
Do you have a sense of how much time you need to really come to that decision?
Yeah, so I think probably next year we will have a pretty clear view of where we're going with this. So I think it's pretty early right now. We'll have a view. And then I think the next question might be, okay, I know that you are all familiar with version 11, and so that'll be on a slide coming up here. Version 11 is the next major release of Infor. And the good news is that'll be our last release, because once we get to that, and if we stick to Infor, then it's just like your cell phone, right? Those updates come, you don't even know they come, right? They happen, and you get them and you react. That's what we have to look forward to by doing this next upgrade. The problem is there's going to be some pain associated with that. It is not this next one to go V11. That will take a commitment of, right now, we're estimating about $8 million to get that done. That'll be a capitalized project that we will have a much more detailed, if we arrive at that's where we want to go, we'll have a much more detailed presentation on that. But that's about the number that we're considering right now. And you'll see that in one of the slides coming up. I have that listed as a future capital project.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So, Director, what's the current status on Sherpa budgeting?
So Sherpa it's in use, and it's I'll leave it. It's in use, just like any other module that we have in ERP. You never stop tweaking and working and trying to do it better, do it faster. I can tell you that we are using it, and of course, like any other one, we're going to look to use it better and more efficiently.
So when did that go live?
Sorry, I've got to look at Walter.
Councilman Miller, it went live just as Famous came to an end, so it would have been 2020.
So, directors, when WFM and payroll went live in the second quarter of this year, there was one aspect of the budgeting process that remained undone, that it was presented to us that hopefully would be completed shortly after those two went live. What is the status of that?
Yeah, so I can give you a technical aspect. So that interface right now is still being worked on. It's not complete. I just got an update from my ERP administrator that while they are changing the passing files back and forth, as I mentioned, there is tweaking that needs to be done to that interface. So is it complete? I would say it's not 100% complete, but there is file exchanges going on with between Infor and Sherpa. Unfortunately, and we'll see this, and it's not just Infor, others do this, they talk about these add-on packages. The interfaces isn't as clean as what maybe the vendor might lead you to believe.
And Director, what's the status on the real property tax system after we decided to divorce from Harris?
Yeah, so I can tell you that I am personally really excited about where we're going with real property. I don't want to give too much away again, we're in negotiations with a company called Aumentum, which is our current provider. And if you recall, one of the motivating factors back in the day, before many of our times, was the fact that MVP, which is our property tax management system, was on an outdated I don't want to get too much away to the public, but it needed some significant upgrades. Well, I'm happy to report that Aumentum has agreed to those upgrades, and we should see over the course of the next year those upgrades happening so that we'll be on I would say a very solid platform. There are many other counties, probably I would say in the 20 other counties in the state of Ohio that are using that software. We'll be on the same level and the same foundation that those other counties are. And my understanding from Aumentum is that they're planned to support that indefinitely. So we're thrilled. We haven't inked the deal on that yet, but we are very close.
So, Director, why did we not go in this direction in the first place, as opposed to the long and convoluted detour that we had with Harris?
So, great question. I'm trying to do a little research then on myself, because again, that was before many of our times. Certainly, the Harris software is a much more modern software. It's been developed more. It's used across the country more. So maybe those were some motivating factors. I think at that time, Aumentum was in a little bit of a state of flux, and that may have cast some doubt on the viability of that product. But I can tell you, as of today, I'm highly confident in Aumentum.
Other questions by my colleagues? Please proceed.
Okay, so I will quickly go through a couple other items here. Let's see. So I wanted to give you, Councilman Miller asked me to provide a capital plan for IT. And in the legislation, there's the complete plan, but I wanted to highlight a couple of items for you. And this slide that we're on really discusses the top 10 capital projects that we're doing in 2023. Now, I will say that most of these are already funded. There are a handful that are not, and I didn't want to come to ask for funding on those until I was absolutely sure that we could do them. And so these represent about $2 million in the entire list. again, when we are to a point where, hey, we do need to come for funding, I'll come to you and we'll have that conversation. We'll have a business case and we'll discuss, does that make sense to use county funds for those projects? But right now, most of these, as I mentioned, are funded. And so we look at the top two. Disaster recovery, and this is something that we've already put a couple $1 million into. It's something that in 2023 we'll put an additional $2 million into. This was all graciously funded by the executive with your all's approval. The county does not have what I would say much of a disaster recovery program. We do backups, we have that, but in terms of a disaster, a compromise to our network, a compromise to our infrastructure, we don't have a plan. And what this money and what we're doing, that it will be used to make our infrastructure resilient. We have a major problem, we'll be able to respond to it, and that's what this project does. Other one I just want to highlight, and I think is pretty exciting, is the next one on the list, which is the Next Gen 911 Addressing Project. And this, again, is funded out of ARPA. This is an opportunity for really the county to interact with our municipalities to standardize our addressing. And what I mean by that is Cuyahoga County, from what I'm told, is in fact, the only county where the municipalities set an address. So a new development goes in, or they knock down a house and put up an apartment. The municipalities address those. Well, that's great, and they do a fine job, but then that all gets sent to the county in various formats, various different types of addresses, and then we turn around and send that to our 911 and to the state. With the Next Gen 911 that's coming down, and I don't know the timing on that, but what this addressing project does is start to standardize with our municipalities, how do we have the addressing and how do we report out that addressing? And where this comes, what the highest and best use case on this is for those emergency responders. And it's to make sure that our addresses are pristine, they're concise, and they're, most of all, accurate. And so that we've reported all those throughout the county the same way. That's what that project does. I'm happy to walk through any of these other projects if there's questions, but I think those two are the big ones that I wanted to point out in terms of our capital spending for 2023, and those are funded via ARPA.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
can I ask a question?
please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, nice seeing you again. Can you repeat what you said for the first line item that you mentioned of the two priorities? Just repeat that again. I just
Sure.
want you to say it again.
Sure. So disaster recovery. And so I mentioned we do backups, right? So you think about it at home, right? You do a backup at home, and we do that here at the county. That's fine, but the problem becomes if we have a backup, but we have nowhere to put that backup.
Yeah.
And so that we don't have that at the county now. We have pieces of that, but what this ARPA funding does and what this capital spending does is develop a plan for disaster recovery.
And thank you. I just wanted to reemphasize, and correct me if I'm wrong, we as the Cuyahoga County do not currently have a disaster recovery operation in place.
From an IT perspective, we do not.
Through the chair to our director, is that troubling?
Oh, yeah. And that's why this is one of, I've been here a short while, this is one of the first big projects that we completed ERP, which was on everybody's mind, but this is our big project to get done.
Through the chair, I don't want to belabor it, but it's somewhat maybe mind-boggling that we don't.
Right.
And
We'll have it, though.
We will have this once this adjustment gets approved.
Yeah, well, we've already got this. This isn't ARPA. This is funded. We're off to the races. I've got guys down probably today in Columbus working on it. So we're well on our way here.
And through the chair, timeline for completion?
Well, it'll be phases. So
to create it, but then through the chair, I'm sorry, the ARPA dollars are one-time dollars that came in for this very specific use. But we're going to have a disaster recover plan or in place in perpetuity.
That's right.
So that's going to be future dollars being requested by the administration through this council.
100%, yes, exactly right. So actually on the next slide, that's one of the bigger items. So while we think about that, right, as we think about disaster recovery going forward, some of it's capital, right, because as things are changing, we're adding new we're adding new equipment, or we're doing different things in Azure, or we're doing different things around, right? We have to change our disaster recovery approach. And so some of that will be capital. Those will be one-time investments that we make to upgrade that disaster recovery. But to your point, there'll be there's an operational aspect of that, right? We need to do testing. How do we know it works, right? We'll do that type of testing. So that becomes more operational. And so that will be an impact to our budget in future years of where we'll need to, if we can't do savings in one spot, we'll be looking to get a bump in funds for that purpose.
Thank you for your specific answers, and Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to ask a question.
So Director, the ones that say additional appropriation, are those the ones that we don't have funding identified for at this time?
That's correct.
Okay.
And again, there's a point. There's a reason for that.
Anything else on this? Okay, we'll go on to the last slide, which is the long-term capital project.
Yeah, so now we're looking into our crystal ball a little bit here. And we're looking into our crystal ball and we're trying to understand, okay, what's coming down the pike? And so the first thing on the list, right, is that Infor V11 upgrade. Big numbers. It's basically a re-implementation into the system. This is something that we will start, once we get our licensing figured, determine what our future course is, then we'll start talking about that upgrade to V11. And so that's something I put out there. I want you to be aware of. These are T-shirt size numbers that we're putting out there, but it gives you an idea of the magnitude of what we're looking at. I'm hopeful that we can come in better. And one of the strategies, I think, and we've talked about this before, is I'm not a big fan of the big bang approach on these things. I much more prefer incremental changes. One of the projects that we're actually looking at doing next year is one of those incremental approaches that's in our accounts payable stream. We're looking at taking that first step into V11 in a smaller bite size just to get going. And again, if it's a disaster, it's a much smaller disaster than a big disaster. So that's what we're talking about in capital for V11. It would be similar in structure to what we did for the ERP. That would include, internal labor, that whole bit.
So, Director, these are very useful documents, and I really appreciate you putting these forward. And I'd like you to keep us informed if anything changes on this plan. And then of course, when we get to next fall, when we do the biennial budget, we'll want to see a 5-year plan that drops 2023 and extends to 2028 and just continues this process. I think it's very useful.
Well, I'm appreciative that you're interested. So this is great. I love talking about this.
Okay, great. Councilman Schreiber.
Evident.
Thank you. The Infor version 11, it was my impression that Infor version 11 was a transitional upgrade, or is it a radical change of process?
The version 11 is a fairly radical change.
That's what I thought. Okay, so it is, you are now at a crossroads if you're going to go that route. Is Infor our dating partner for the future, or are we coming to the end of our dating life with this partner? And we can ride this, we can ride this version, ride version 10, as long as we're comfortable with it without, people do pass upgrades all the time.
So,
and how long could we pass an upgrade?
Yeah, that's a delicate question, because Infor has said, hey, because this is in the cloud, right? So this isn't on our software.
This is the radical part of it, because it's completely different than, as my colleague was alluding to her concerns about cloud.
Yes.
You will have no choice. You will have to go to the cloud. You are not going to be storing your own services. We're not going to be having our own server. It's not going to be any of that stuff.
So what's interesting about this one, I don't want to put words in Infor mouth, and they may come back, Infor's mouth, and they may come back and tell me I'm completely wrong. We are in a single tenant environment. So without getting, so even though we're in the cloud, it's like only our cloud. So we have a little bit of leeway that comes with its own set of problems, its own set of headaches, but we do have a little bit of leeway there. However, they have said, hey, we're going to stop supporting this these dates always kind of float around, but we're going to stop supporting this in roughly 2026, 2027. So we have to make a move off of V10. Like I said, we probably have a little leeway there, but I don't want to play too much, I don't want to play chicken with this. When we go to version 11, we'll be in a multi-tenant environment, which sounds scary. It sounds like we're intermingling our data. We're not. We're basically just using the same software as every other company, county that's using Infor version 11. That gives us, that sounds like it puts us in a weak position, but it actually puts us in a position of power. And what I mean by that is now we don't have these big upgrades. We consume the upgrades once a month, once every 2 months, and we're making those little incremental changes. We never have to do an upgrade, a major upgrade again. It gives us big advantages of taking advantage of new technologies, new functionality that Infor has provided inside their software. So I don't know if I answered your question, Mr. Schron, but
You didn't ask the dating question. I was asking the date question as to when you have to, and you said you were going to be delicate about that. So I wasn't sure whether delicate means you're going to give us a 3-year window or a 5-year window that we have to make this call.
I think we'll know next year what if we're back on the market or if we're
Okay, so we're back on the market. Let's just play it both ways.
Sure.
We're back on the market. We've picked another, at the risk of my colleagues throwing me out the window, we picked a new ERP software package. That's still a 3-year project, probably from that point, from even after, and it's a 1-year analysis and 3-year implementation. So I don't want anybody to think that if we get off next year, that we're going to be going on somebody else probably for a year with an analysis and 2 or 3 years to, you're probably looking at 3 to 4 years from even this point.
That's right. That puts us around 2026, right? So, yep.
Okay, yeah, and at the risk of my other colleague with being concerned about the cloud and dating myself, the Stones had something about "Get Off My Cloud" too, I think, as I recall, in one of their strong songs.
So, Director and colleagues, I just got to say, I know you got to maintain a bargaining position as best you can, but after all we've been through to get this going, I don't find the idea of a new ERP operator very appetizing.
Nor do I. So it'll have to be a heck of a business case, but who knows, right? We need to keep that out there. I need to have that card to play.
Understood.
Yeah, well, appetizing or not appetizing, if your choice is that you're going to be in a cloud environment with multiple tenants, that might turn people off too on the flip side. So anyway, that on your second item, video surveillance, could you tell me are we video surveillance in the building or external to the building?
Yeah, so that is all of our video surveillance. So that is, and this may be on the sheriff's capital plan as well. Sheriff will most likely pay for it. He's paying for it right now. These are just the constant upgrades we need to do to cameras, to equipment that's controlling all that. So that's what that's all about. So that's jail, that's all the buildings, that's even uninhabited areas where we have cameras going.
Is that the streets that we're sitting on right now? Is that up and down? I mean, I'm not trying to get so specific that I want the bad guys to know where our cameras are, but I know that there are other people looking at, for example, there's real conversations about Playhouse Square and its video surveillance looking up and down and being an integrated solution. Are we having conversations with that?
That's absolutely, and we do have some of that integrated solution going, and this is furthering that.
Are we integrating with Playhouse Squares?
Ooh, I
don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think we are.
That's my point is, they're getting ready to spend $3 to $4 million on that side of the aisle. Why aren't we should be having, it should be, though I'm not necessarily a follower of London, London has cameras everywhere that you can see, anywhere up and down the streets, anywhere you look. You can't do something nasty in London without the cameras picking up.
Yeah, and that proposal hasn't been there, right? I know in my neighborhood, you have to have a big blue light on it and things go, you have to notify the people that you have that sort of thing. I don't know the legalities of that. We'll be prepared. This is not for that. This is for buildings. This is for outside the building, but not necessarily like going down East 9th. It's maybe in the back parking lot or something.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, well, just you'd certainly want to be coordinated. If somebody's doing something down East 9th Street, you'd want to coordinate your back parking lot.
Yeah.
It just seems to me.
Yep.
So they're talking. Thank you.
Yep.
Anything else? Thank you very much, Director.
All right, well, thank you for your time.
So under miscellaneous business, to Trevor, do we have a date yet for a time for next Tuesday?
Good morning, Council, or good afternoon, Councilman, sorry. We do not have a time yet. We are waiting to see if the prosecutors needs to come in for any pending litigation and to see what CBAs, if any, that our clerk receives from the law department.
Okay, so the next and hopefully final meeting of the budget update process will be next Tuesday, the 22nd, a week from tomorrow, at some time, starting sometime in the early afternoon, that the council president will decide.
Mr.
And-
Chair, if I might have a point of privilege.
Yes, you may.
A week ago on Saturday, Barbara Boyd, who was a state representative in Cuyahoga County, passed away, and she will be greatly missed, especially among women and African Americans, as a leader in the democratic process in this county. Her services will be held on Friday, November 18th at 11 o'clock at Forest Hills Presbyterian Church at 3031 Monticello Boulevard in Cleveland Heights. Thank you.
Thank you very much for bringing us
You
that.
served with her.
Yes, I did. Thank you very much for that very important announcement. Anything else? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. We are adjourned.